Houghton was a very dedicated member of the board, and his qualifications were impeccable. And we wanted to have an award that people would strive for.
Evans was a very decent person. He was a very capable person. And he was older than a lot of us at the time. And I think because of those things, we looked up to Evans. When he died, we felt we must continue to remember his memory because he was that type of a person.
Born in 1914 in the Gulf Coast lumber town of Kiln, Mississippi, Evans Houghton played a crucial, if not central role in the 20th century's defining events: the Second World War, the rise of Fidel Castro, and the growth of the healthcare industry. Although he left no memoir, as one of the founders of the New England Society for Healthcare Communications, his legacy lives on.
Public relations is a fixer. You go into a situation and you make sure this article doesn't go into the paper or this article does. You try to get people to come together in a consensus. He did a lot of that, a really lot of that.
His view is, you can turn almost every bad story into a good story if you're good enough. And, when something would happen in the hospital and they'd end up, or somebody was going to the newspaper, he could come up with a way to make it so it was not a big speed bump, it was just a little thing that nobody'd notice.
Evans attended Howe Military Academy in Howe, Indiana, as well as public high school in Fort Wayne. In the 1930s, he joined the U.S. Army and spent time stationed in the Panama Canal Zone. In 1938, he was discharged from service at Hamilton Field in Marin County, California, where he took up life as the Marin County correspondent for the San Francisco Examiner. In 1940, as war raged in Europe and Asia, Evans, along with millions of other young American men, registered for the draft. Age 26, he was 6'1" and weighed 168 pounds with brown hair, blue eyes, and a ruddy complexion. On January 2, 1941, Evans met Kathleen K. Anderson, who worked at the San Rafael telephone office. 6 weeks later, they married. Kay recounted those years in her brief memoir.
After a whirlwind courtship, we married February 15, 1941. We were out every night to the press club in San Francisco or visiting friends there in Marin. Perhaps it was the uncertainty of the times that accounted for our haste. We bought each other gold wedding bands and invited my fellow workers from the telephone office and other friends to hear us exchange our vows. We rented a hillside cottage in San Rafael. Evans set up a darkroom in the corner of the garage and began processing his own pictures.
That following December, Imperial Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, catapulting the U.S. into war against the Axis powers. Again, Kay recalls the days immediately after the attack.
Evans promptly re-enlisted at Hamilton Field and then called the Examiner to say he had joined up and would no longer cover the news. And if it was all right, his wife would take over for him, which she was qualified to do, as she had been a reporter for the Mills College Weekly. The editor, although unimpressed by the recommendations, nevertheless said okay. We boxed up a few possessions and stored them with good-natured friends. We said goodbye to our hillside cottage and moved in with a friend who had offered Evans a place to stay until we settled.
In January 1942, he was sworn into the U.S. Army Air Corps and sent to Life magazine's photographer's school in New York City. By late 1942, he was a photographer for the Air Transport Command and stationed in Hawaii.
His job in World War II was as a PR man, as a cameraman during parts of the war. He did reconnaissance behind enemy lines by flying in the belly of a bomber in the bomb bay with a camera. They would go behind enemy lines, he'd take pictures, then he'd have to run out of the plane and get to his place, and he would do the exposures and all of that, and then he'd do the enlargements, and then he had to run over to Central Command with the pictures and explain all the little hairy details about that. And he did that a lot, and that was the part that we didn't know about because it was still classified when we were kids.
In 1943, the Army chose Evans to be the official photographer for Eleanor Roosevelt's trip to the South Pacific.
General Ryan and MacArthur's two other top generals managed to have something to do with her trip in the Pacific. And Evans got assigned to that because of his ability to deal with people well. They became friends. They stayed friends for her whole life. I have letters from Eleanor to my father and to my mother. When I was born, they asked her to be my godmother. My youngest brother has a whole string of letters just after I was born about money. So I have the feeling that she paid for the birth, my birth, on borrowed money, and she wasn't too worried about getting it back, and he was real worried of trying to get her paid off.
Meant as a publicity tour and morale booster, the trip was top secret. Roosevelt disappeared for 10 days in August, only to reappear in the South Pacific for 5 weeks. While there, she traveled to Australia and New Zealand and 17 smaller islands, meeting 400,000 U.S. soldiers. Houghton would later tell Army and Navy Journal he shot more than 23,000 feet of film on that trip, which the Journal noted was nearly a foot for every mile they traveled. Although uncredited, Evans took some of the most famous images of the First Lady during this trip. After returning to the U.S., Mrs. Roosevelt invited Evans and Kay to dine at the White House with family and friends. Kay described the First Lady as a tall, erect woman with friendly blue eyes and a warm smile. Lovely, like my own mother. By July of 1946, Houghton was out of the service and back in San Rafael, where he had opened an overnight commercial photo studio service. When Mrs. Roosevelt visited in early March 1947, Evans and Kay had a new baby, Evelyn. The former First Lady described the visit in her newspaper column, My Day.
The other day, we drove up into the hills near San Rafael to lunch with some young friends of mine, Mr. and Mrs. Evans Houghton. They are living in a little cottage deep among the redwoods. Their baby, as she grows up in the shadow of those immense trees, will certainly have a sense of time and space. Redwoods do not burn, even in a forest fire.
Evans would remain a lifelong friend of Mrs. Roosevelt and was an invited guest to her 1962 funeral. In addition to helping his family, the former First Lady likely helped Evans establish his public relations career. Evans did not adjust easily to post-war life, and his photography business and marriage foundered. In September of 1947, he and Kay divorced. Kay enrolled in law school, and Evans moved to New York City. By 1949, Evans had married Ruth Mortensen, whom he met at night school. Ruth had lost her husband at Pearl Harbor. Her son Stanley had never met his father. Ruth and Evans would have 4 other children: Eleanor, Charles, John, and Richard. Ruth was a public relations professional in her own right, and later served as public relations director for the Massachusetts Heart Association and at Concord Hospital in Concord, New Hampshire. Evans spent most of the 1950s working in public relations in Manhattan, and in April of 1959, he made national news in connection with Fidel Castro. Only 3 months after seizing power in the Cuban Revolution, Castro embarked on a public relations tour of the U.S. with Houghton as his press agent.
The government was looking for somebody that had no political aspirations whatsoever, because they knew that this was going to be a hair-raising piece with Fidel, and they needed somebody who was like absolutely neutral, not going to be hurt by it, not going to be hurt from it. And that's why Evans got the short contract to do the Fidel Castro thing in the United States, which you probably have some pictures of.
When Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin columnist Tom Cawley asked about the arrangement, Houghton was bluntly evasive.
One night I got a call about Castro, and the next day I was in Havana talking to him. I was hired. "Who called you?" I asked him. "I won't tell you," he said. "I am employed by American Industry." I asked him, "Who's that?" He said, 6 corporations. "What corporations are those?" "I won't tell you," he said.
By June, reporters had uncovered that Castro paid a New York PR firm $72,000 to manage his U.S. publicity. The firm recommended that he hire Houghton as a press agent for a 2-week U.S. tour. Evans registered with the U.S. Justice Department as a foreign agent and disclosed that he was paid $2,000 for the work, the equivalent of $40,000 today. The firm also recommended that Castro shave his beard, but the Cuban leader refused. in what New York Times writer Tony Perrottet called a canny decision. By April, Perrottet wrote on the 60th anniversary of the trip, Castro's so-called brand had become so renowned that an American toy company produced 100,000 forage caps with strap-on beards for kids, which were put on sale alongside Davy Crockett coonskin hats and G.I. Joe helmets.
In the New York area, they couldn't find a doctor who specialized in what I had, which was polio. And so they decided, because Boston Children's Hospital had a polio clinic and polio doctors, and that is my understanding and what I was always told of why we moved to Boston.
In 1964, Houghton became the public relations director at New England Deaconess Hospital. He threw himself into the work to the point of ensuring that his remote camp in New Hampshire had a telephone line so he could be contacted even while away fishing. Houghton became such a fixture in Boston media that in 1971, longtime Boston Globe Society columnist Marjorie Sherman called him one of the most urbane men in town.
Evans would have seen the word urbane, which he was quite proud of, was the fact that he was always in a white shirt, always had a tie on, and always had a jacket on. He was never seen outside of that.
The white handkerchief in his suit pocket and a red bandana in his back pocket, and I think that was his signature. I definitely feel that that was like really part of him.
In 1968, during the annual New England Hospital Assembly Convention, Evans Houghton and colleagues from other New England hospitals and clinics, including Thruston Hammer from the Leahy Clinic and Rosabelle Tift from Rumford Hospital in Maine, formed the New England Hospital Public Relations Association, or NEPRA.
I happen to be fortunate enough to be one of the founders, along with Evans Houghton, of the New England Hospital Public Relations Association, which is still going strong today and providing a valuable service to the public and to hospitals. The reason for the organization to begin with was to provide a public exposure for the hospital. In other words, the hospital was not some sort of a private institution that had no bearing beyond taking care of sick people. That it was involved in fundraising, it was involved in medical services, emergency services, training programs, all that sort of things that hospitals are involved with that the public should know about and should support.
I'm so pleased that I was part of it. I was part of it because what has become, what we wanted to do initially, we've achieved. We wanted to have a way for the public relations people to get together. I always look forward to meeting my friends and to networking with new people. It was very pleasing to be able to go to those things, and right now to know that it's expanded to 300 people, 300 members, that's terrific. I really take a great deal of pride in that.
On Thursday, May 16, 1974, Evans Houghton died of a pulmonary embolism at New England Deaconess Hospital in Boston, where he was being treated for lung cancer. He was 59 years old. The following year, the New England Hospital Public Relations Association established an award in Houghton's honor. To this day, the Evans Houghton Award is given to NESHCO members for outstanding contributions to hospital public relations, marketing, and communications.
I was very happy and surprised to receive the Evans Houghton Award myself, because I knew what it meant, because it was on my board that we designed it, and it was really an achievement for me.
I think Evans would have been very, very happy. I'm probably even excited by his views of the world, that the association is still functioning in 2023 and thriving.
My father, Evans Houghton, would be so very proud to see that this is something that stayed, that he's left behind.